This is Create the Next from ProCFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I am Chris Vintliff, and I'm joined by my friend John Martin, the return of John Martin. And John, we're talking about kind of picking up a little bit on our previous conversation months ago. What got you here won't get you there. And I think one of the interesting ideas is what got you here at one point. Things change and things evolve and businesses grow. And so you might have had a mindset of innovation or of growth, or you might have been on that roller coaster of startup life, and then you kind of get stable and you might be thinking, look, we're really doing our best to be proactive here to stay ahead of things. But I think, and tell me if you agree, a lot of companies just kind of fall into a status quo, especially as we grow or we get business. We start just sort of solving the problems in front of us instead of thinking about maybe strategically, what is growth going to do as this company changes? So let's talk a little bit about kind of what your thoughts are on, how management needs to change, how information needs to change, how our finance functions need to change as we move past kind of that status quo and into something, a little bit more sometimes turbulent or evolutionary.
Yeah, sure. Excellent discussion. I think very few people would disagree that running a $50 million company is very different than running a $5 million company. And there's all those iterations in between. And, so growth is a wonderful thing. But, the people that have taken their business, management that has taken their business to this level and now wants to grow to the next level, because the business changes over time, the management priorities change over time, the information needs change over time. What got you to this level will probably not get you to the next level. In an earlier podcast, I had kind of likened it to sports that, at each level of sports, high school, college, the pros, athletes will tell you the game changes so much, it's almost like a new game. And I think that's still true of business, that, as businesses grow and get more complicated, increased competition, it really does change. The problem, though, for business folks is that unlike sports, you're not clearly on a high school playing field or a college playing field. It changes subtly. And, to your point, unless you're kind of aware of it, it's hard to deal. It's hard to recognize that your business is changing. First of all, just day to day is a huge time commitment, solving all the day-to-day problems. So it's sometimes hard to stand back from the business and recognize that things are changing. But it's also in some ways, I guess, almost like our children, that you see them every day and they don't really seem to change very much. But then an out-of-town relative comes in and hasn't seen them in several months and says, oh boy, Joey or Jill, boy, how much they've changed. So I don't know, maybe businesses need an out-of-town relative to come and visit every once in a while. But the focus, I think, of the discussion this morning is really on two things that you mentioned. One is the changing, evolving role of management, during growth. And the second really is the increasing importance of the availability and actually use of information. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I really like this idea of this great illustration, which personifies kind of this issue, because I think sometimes this idea of what got you here won't get you there. There can be an obviousness to it. So companies can say, well, of course. And we can think more about the organization. So we can think organizationally, well, of course, we'll have to make these hires, or we'll have to do these things, or we'll have to, make these acquisitions or these capital investments or whatever. Part of what drives home for me in your illustration of, wow, Joe has really grown up a lot, is the personal aspect of what got you here won't get you there. So not thinking necessarily organizationally as a manager or as a leader or about the leaders around me, but personally, what got me here as a leader won't get me there. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are some of the, some of the symptoms that I, as a manager or a director, an executive, a leader, that I'm starting to struggle, or that those around me are starting to struggle with my availability, with my skill sets, with my own ability to delegate. And it's keeping us as a team or as an organization from getting to that next place because I'm not recognizing some of the personal attributes that I'm experiencing.
Yeah, a lot of it is just bandwidth. I mean, initially, you start a company or it's a smallish company maybe you bought into, often there's two or three kind of core managers. Maybe they're friends, they have a similar value and aspirations. But you're really, because the business, the focus is really on being lean and mean and cost effective. So you have to be kind of a jack of all trades. So those two or three individuals are really doing everything. And, there's not really, the business is fairly straightforward, doesn't have a lot of complications. But it really is a matter of, there are not a lot of formal processes, there's not a lot of formal planning, but you're kind of doing everything yourself. But then over time, as the business grows, you just run out of bandwidth. I mean, I had a conversation with a company president. We were talking about some additional tasks that needed to be taken on and who should do it. And he was saying, well, I'll do it. And I said, my 2 cents is that you're out of bandwidth. I mean, you have a choice. You need to delegate or invent a day with more than 24 hours. And I thought that was a rhetorical question. He was starting to think about, well, how can I spend more time with, and I was like, no, you have to have a life. And if you want to continue to grow, it's only going to get worse. So the management expertise, the management focus, sort of turns from doing everything yourself to, managing more, to delegating, to hiring people, to thinking in terms of, having formal processes that kind of address everything, and that becomes more so. There becomes issues over time that you don't really need to think about when you're small, but what is the corporate culture going to be? What's my management style going to be? Simple things, seemingly simple things. As I grow the management team and maybe a middle management team, what financial information am I going to share with them? I mean, I've had the experience of, I had joined a company. There were a couple of remote offices, and one of the offices was crazy busy over the summer. And towards the end of the year, and then they had a fair amount of autonomy. They called up to say, well, how did we do? And they weren't provided any financial information. So, it's because it was a family-run company. It was growing. That had never really been a need before. But, without financial information, it's kind of like playing ball without keeping score. And more than that, it's an indication of how you're doing. What can I do to make changes, et cetera? So, it really is a case that, you evolve from being a jack of all trades, doing it yourself. And it's a hard transition to sort of say, I'm going to start offloading some of that responsibility. I need to start hiring good people. I need to train them. I need to have processes that make sense. And I need to think in terms of what this company will look like going forward. So, the management role evolves from really doing it all yourself to really managing others. And growing the company, growing the management team. And that's a hard transition for a lot of people to sort of, take that trust from doing it themselves to saying, all right, I trust you to do this for us.
I agree, but I think it's so necessary. When we're a smaller organization, as you point out, hard work and hustle can get us, to stick with your analogy, quite a ways down the field. We might get to the 40, 50-yard line. We might get into the opponent's area, but we're not going to get into the red zone if it's all about us all the time. And I think that there's a sign of, I wonder if there should be as much sort of attention on, when you're in that smaller space and you think, look, here's what we need to grow everybody, and you put it on revenue goals or profitability goals or whatever, but you don't necessarily think, and then I, as a leader, or we leaders, or the 2 or 3 good buddies who started this company, we're going to need to have some thresholds for when we're going to let go. Whether that's a time, thing when we are spending this many hours, or, when we've reached, because as you point out, our finance functions when we're small, they're less mature, they're less sophisticated, but they get more dynamic, and you can't just keep plugging away with the way you've done things. And there need to be some some checks in there to say, now's the time, whether it's a conversation like you had where you said, look, here's what you got to do. You have to have somebody in there who's going to help you sort of see the reality around you. Why is that so difficult? Why is that so difficult, do you think, for business leaders to sort of, I don't know, hand off that delegation part or be willing to see that they're limiting their own potential because they're unwilling to see their need to let go?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. One, there is a mindset when you're, earlier stage, smaller, that every penny, is important. So cost being, cost effective. So spending money for people starts to be a challenge. And it also isn't done in one fell swoop. So, who do I hire next? What do I spend on them? But it also, I think, is a bit of a trust factor. I mean, I know it's going to get done if I do it. Bringing on somebody, having them, training them, having them kind of buy into the corporate culture, whether it exists or needs to be created. Those are all kind of almost different skills. And so you have to kind of transition yourself, again, from doing it all yourself to delegating some of that. That's also the numbers. I mean, the information becomes increasingly important.
Yeah.
When you're small and less complicated, it's kind of, in my experience, kind of a combination of gut feel and some rudimentary numbers. As things grow and the business becomes more complicated, you really need pretty good financial information. And most of the folks that are starting these companies are with small companies. They're operations people or they're sales people, they're marketing people, maybe engineers. They're not finance people. So, even if there is information, there's always a question: is this the best information available? Are these the so-called key KPIs, key performance indices? And then it's, what do you do with that information? For instance, as the business becomes more complicated, do you have good cost and profitability information down to your individual products or product lines or distribution systems, distribution channels? Do you have good information there? Because if you don't, and I tell people this, if you then really create the good information, you're going to have surprises as to the profitability down to the product level or distribution channel level. And some of those surprises will be pleasant. Some of those surprises will be unpleasant. But particularly if your competitors have that information and you're competing for, sales with those competitors, well, you're going to be a disadvantage if they have better information than you do. So, it really is a case that increasingly you need to rely on information, both to run your business, to plan your business, and importantly, and I tell folks this, that the financial information should really reflect on a timely basis what's going on operationally in the company. The numbers need to be credible. The worst of all cases is for management to have some feel of how the business is doing, and that feel is opposite is not supported by what you see in the financial results. So the financial information should really be helpful, much like going to your doctor for your annual physical. All those results, I mean, they should really be indices of what's going on in the business. And often, you need to analyze what's going on further, but they should certainly be something that management embraces and looks at as, yes, I feel the business is going this way and the numbers are showing that. And if the numbers aren't showing that, let's dig deeper to find out what's really going on. So
what I really hear you sharing is the value of having that outside expertise, as you grow and you move past that ability to have kind of these modest finance functions and reporting that just does the job because you don't have a lot going on. When you have somebody in there who's got fresh eyes, but also unique, diverse, broad experiences and expertise, who can look at these things and say, oh, well, here's what I see, and based on what I've seen before, here's some advice and here's some ways forward. I think that's a tremendously valuable sort of strategic complement and asset for a leader to have. How do you feel like that same sort of vision or ability to see bigger pictures or pictures differently helps me stay more proactive as a leader. So I'm thinking about the problems that I'm going to be facing. Those are going to get more sophisticated too. Those issues are going to become more robust. Those things are going to become, even the risk is going to be more dramatic than they were when I was smaller. What do I need around me so that I'm avoiding problems, or I'm seeing problems before they become huge issues, and I've got ways to deal with them proactively instead of reactively?
Sure. Well, the first thing is just, identifying potential issues. What are some of the telltale signs? And, we talked about bandwidth, and that's some of it, but it's feeling that, I'm reaching a point where I don't really have my arms around the business. Things, if I'm implementing new programs, that implementation isn't crisp anymore. I'm not, I'm lagging. And so those are kind of the indirect indications that, feeling like you're not controlling the business or understanding the business as you once were. But more direct is typically the numbers. Looking at the financials, having the best information possible. I mean, the information that you used to run the company 3 and 5 years ago, particularly, as we were talking about here in a growth mode, particularly adding new products, new distribution channels, is probably not the best information that's available today. And then it's getting behind that information. Finding out what's really going on in the business is usually more difficult than ultimately the fix. Sometimes the fix is just something, I don't want to say it's stupid, but it's something simple that someone just missed. But it can, it can have bad consequences for the business if you don't do something about it. So, and yes, sometimes it's just a fresh look at things are kind of helpful. I mean, I've been involved with a couple of family businesses where, the senior management has basically spent their entire career with the company, and most of the senior management team has spent most of their time in the industry. So, they're used to looking at things in a certain way, and sometimes an outside perspective, is kind of a good thing to have. It's just not that it's everything they're doing is wrong, but maybe there's some tweaking. So, it really is a case that you want to be aware of those telltale signs. But it's often the numbers that really are the most direct indication. One of my, I don't know, it's either favorite or least favorite word is anomalies. Mm. You look at the numbers and somebody will say, oh, it's an anomaly. Well, which is like, oh, don't worry about it. It's like a passing storm. We'll be fine. And, my experience is that if something looks funny, something looks odd, there's more to the story. So dig in today before it becomes much more than an anomaly. So, but it's that detective work that, is often required to really ferret out those issues before they become major issues.
What great advice, and I love that. I love that illustration of anomaly. It's either my favorite word or my least favorite word.
Yeah.
That's fantastic, and I love also this analogy to the detective work. You bring in somebody who's got a keen eye for this kind of stuff, who's got a sense for these sorts of things, and sees what you don't see. And I think that's a powerful partner to have and an essential partner to have, especially as you move past that hard work and hustle and into systems and processes that are going to help your business grow. John Martin from ProCFO Partners, sharing what got you here won't get you there, sort of part 2. I can't wait for part 3, John. Maybe the next conversation where we'll
stay tuned
to something else. It's been great to spend time with you again this morning. Thanks for joining us and all your generosity with your advice and expertise.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.